Okay, so let me introduce you. And if I leave something, you can edit later.
Sure. Go ahead. Let me see.
Okay, so the very first thing I want to mention about you is that the co-author of my very first article.
Yeah.
And also my classmate at Asian University. We're studying masters in psychology, Master of Science, and she's a registered psychometrician. In Philippines, should I say the country specifically? Maybe I should. And and she's a qualitative researcher. She's done very interesting research and attended many conferences, and she's a very experienced researcher than me. So she has a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, hi. Just so I am Zuchi's friend and colleague. We've known each other for around a year and a few months now. And he is my co-author in two published articles. So yeah, congratulations on the both of us. I am a registered psychometrician in the Philippines, and I am primarily a qualitative researcher, although I have done quantitative research in the past as well. And my research interests are centered on I've done gender studies, I've done orthographic studies, I've done studies with individuals with Down syndrome, and currently my research interests are interdisciplinary in the sense that I'm working with applied psychology and telemental health in terms of artificial intelligence, as well as social behavioral neuroscience. And I'm also affiliated with the International Center for Research and Development.
Yeah, just awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so experiences what you are. So
yeah, and also like I work at two labs. We work in together, right? With under applied psychology with Dr. Lyen, and I'm also under the behavioral neuroscience and neuropharmacology lab with Dr. Liao right now as well.
Excellent. Yeah. It feels like it's obvious that we're doing the introduction in the end, right?
That's fine. You can they don't have to know that we're doing, because you're already finished the whole thing, but it's it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the topic or the question is, what is think like a researcher? How do you think like a researcher? Or what does it mean to think like a researcher, right? And then my perspective, my point is, what I want the listeners of this video to understand or to apply for themselves is where is any information or knowledge is coming from, and how is it coming from? For example, whenever people read something on a book or an article or on a website, right? There are many websites that make the research article shorter and then publish it on their websites. And then many people can consume that information. And then, for example, about the sleep, there are many news articles about the sleep, maybe from the research articles that was originally published by Matthew Walker, who is a sleep researcher, and then
sleep. Okay.
Yeah, and then maybe because of the journalist, the information could be presented maybe wrongly, or maybe I can't say that everything is wrong about the journalists, but maybe there could be any biases or any logical errors. So because why journalists can make an error, right? Because journalists are a human, and then humans cognitive is very, very biased, and then they can make mistakes, or maybe journalists don't know about the sleep research, and they don't know about the methods, or they don't know about the about the questionnaires, if the researcher used the questionnaires or any tests. So there are many factors. And then the product is the news article, right? And the end end user is consuming the news article, not directly the original research article. And then there's a gap, right? And then I want the listeners or the watchers to understand that, okay, there could be any error, and then how do you check that error, whether it's correct, whether it's valid or true, in other words, or whether it's reliable enough, right? How can they say that 8 hours of sleep is enough for 20 to 25 years old people? Why only 20 to 25 years people, right? Why not 20 to 30 years old, or why not 20 to 40 years old? And also what kind of people should they be American people, or should they be Mongolian people?
Right. Sure.
And also maybe what did they do? What were their occupation, right? Were they someone who goes to the mining for a full 2 weeks and then work there for during the day and during the night, and then come back to their home for another 2 weeks? Or were the participants office workers? If they were the office workers, maybe they need different amount of sleeps. So basically the questions: is it valid enough? Is it reliable enough? Who were the participants, and what were the methods or the tools they used, the researchers? And were the researchers even good enough, right? That's also one of the questions we should ask. So how should we trust the researchers, right? Should we just trust them because they graduated Harvard or because they graduated Cambridge, right?
Right.
So just they have some degree, or the name or the status doesn't mean that they're good researchers, right? So we need to check it by ourselves, and then maybe compare the articles from different researchers from different countries, maybe. So that's what I'm meaning about to think like a researcher. Don't trust or don't take it for granted, right? At least from the news article, or at least from the books. The books are using the research findings that's supporting maybe the author's idea, but there could be many contradicting results. So that's what I'm.
I like that. I like that your perspective on the question is based off of your background and also like your worldview. I don't know if you remember, but there was that one time when we had dinner at Miao, and then you had this sort of research breakdown because you realized that, I think you were talking about happiness, or like how to quantitatively understand happiness, and then you realize that, oh, actually nobody had any idea. None of these researchers have any idea what they're doing. And then so that's kind of the perspective that you have, which of course I agree is something that's very important to think, which is like your whole point is to think critically, right? You look at a piece of information, and then is it something that's actually real? Is it something that's actually applicable? Is it something that's actually practical? And that is a very important component and a very important step in the research process. And I completely agree. I would have to say that based from my background, based from the fact that I'm mostly a qualitative researcher, my view of thinking like a researcher is a lot of, how do I mention this? Like a sort of problem-solving oriented knowledge generation. That's how I would look at it, because it's not just taking what is already there, seeing if it's true, but taking what's there and then seeing how you can apply it, coming up with more questions and more answers, and piling up all this sort of knowledge for other people to use. That's how that's how theories are made. And from theories, that's how sort of methods are applied. So for example, you think about cognitive behavioral therapy that came from something like sort of theory, and that theory came from all the knowledge that was generated by research. And that's sort of, it becomes this step that's very vital towards the continuing part of the industry, sort of the continuing science of psychology itself. And a very important component to it, apart from practically understanding whether this information is true or reliable or valid, is, for me personally, it's curiosity. right? What are you curious about? It's asking all these questions, and then that's how I see it, and then that's part of the fun of it for me, which is like you begin with a sort of curiosity, and then sort of getting. Sometimes at the end of it, though, you do realize that maybe you come up with more questions than answers, right? Yeah, but that's part of it too, which is it's just this ongoing sort of research process, and it is a knowledge generation type of experience for me, which is questions and answers and problems, solving problems and stuff, which is a very interesting sort of diversified perspective from your perspective.
It is.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was about to say. No, but yeah, that's how I would view it, I think.
Mm-hmm. So the questions, right? So maybe you've read something about the maybe gender inequality, let's say, and then you came up with some questions because the article or the book didn't mention about it or didn't talk about it, and then you have questions. So the next thing is, what should you do about the question? You have the questions, right? But you're looking for the answers. But should you come up with the answer by yourself, or should you read thoroughly through books or articles or any other sources?
Yeah, so you're describing, I suppose, the next step to it, right? Which is you look at what is currently being known and then seeing how you're basically asking about the research gap.
Yes, and also the research question. Maybe that question can be the next research question, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're looking at the information that is available, and then you're seeing how your question can be answered, or the lack of information that's available, and if you can generate the knowledge to answer that type of question, which is like the whole thing requires the skills that you mentioned earlier, which is the ability to, of course, understand whether this information is empirically based or if it's not empirically based. If you remember I hope you remember, because we're lab mates, my thesis, right? Which is I'm trying to come up with an empirical basis for the components of mental health applications. Right. And then that perspective is very quantitative, like you mentioned earlier, because you look at the phones, you look at the applications that people use on their phones, and people use them every day. People rely on these things, right? And then if you apply sort of thinking like a researcher from what you mentioned earlier, how do you know that these things are effective? And then you talked about different kinds of people from all different types of backgrounds, like their ages, their cultures, their work backgrounds and everything. And then so how do you know if that works for them? So that's also like a very important, it's like a combination of what you mentioned and what I mentioned, which is verifying whether that information is empirically based. And so that's what I'm doing. And then at the same time, if you recall, there's a qualitative component to my study, which was creation of the study protocol. Right. So that's where I would probably go in, because it's not just enough to know that are they empirically based or are they not empirically based. There are more stuff that you have to answer throughout the research process. For example, if they are empirically based, what about these components have allowed them to be effective? Is that something that can be applied on other platforms? Is it something that's only available through smartphones? In the direction of the sort of more technological pursuit of the whole science, where is it going? And then you have to answer that. And then the same is true for the opposite, which is if they turn out not to be empirically based, I'm hoping they are, because that's my results. If they're not, then that's a question in itself. Why are they not empirically based? What is it about the whole thing that makes them ineffective? Is it the applications themselves? Is it the people who are using it? Is it age? Is it the way the study was designed? And then so you're just coming up with, that's why it's important. And then I think once you progress throughout the research process, when you do the results and discussion, the results is verifying whether or not it's empirical, and then discussion part is being able to apply those results and coming up with more questions. Yeah, if that makes sense. That's how I see the whole research process and sort of answering the questions. But
okay, let's say that we're trying to design a research, psychological research specifically, right? And then the very first thing, what should we do? Okay, we have an idea. Let's do a research and publish an article. A very ambitious goal.
No, it's not. It's fine if that's your end goal as a researcher, just to publish it.
Well, it's very it seems very overwhelming for the new researchers, right?
People who are coming in.
Because they've never wrote any articles in English, and they don't know how the journals work and where to find the journals, etc. So maybe let's say that someone is trying to write a research and then publish it. So what should they do next?
Ooh, okay, so this is a great question, and I think it's also going to reflect our difference in terms of backgrounds, because I have had a few research done in the past, like a decent amount of experience. I have to go back to the fundamentals in order to explain this in such a way that it doesn't, like intimidate people who are just trying out. But if I'm being completely honest, I sort of start off, if it's possible, at the end or at the middle. Because your perspective is like obviously how it's supposed to be done. But what happens to me, just like personally speaking, when I start to do it, of course it starts off like with a question, right? But honestly, like the certain sense of curiosity that I mentioned earlier is very important. Asking the questions that you mentioned as well is also very important. But when you say that you have an end goal in mind, so that's when all of the sort of experience plays in, and sort of the research that you've done plays in. Because what do I mean by this? It's like, if I was trying to, for example, I have this conference that I want to apply to in July. It's the International Conference on Gender and Women's Studies. And then so it's like, that's my end goal. And then so it colors in the rest of the experience, it colors in the rest of the process for me. I'm not gonna start off with a completely different, like out of nowhere type of topic, right? I have to come up with something that's, first of all, within the theme. You look at the themes. Oh, is this something that I'm curious about? Is this something that I'm interested in? You look at the keynote speakers. Are these people going to be able to understand what I'm talking about in terms of like my industry, my background? Is it interdisciplinary? Is it very focused? Is it very specific? Stuff like that. And then you think about, and then you work your way back. You do have, like, for example, like I do this. I don't know if it's going to make sense to other people, but, and then I look at, do I have existing data? If I do, what am I going to do with that data? How am I going to get answers from the data? And then that's kind of methodology making. If I do not have the data, what can I do to get that data? Because it's very easy to say, sort of very simple idea to think, oh, questions and then answers. But like the process in itself has a lot of very specific steps that require data gathering and data analysis. And that's something that you create out of the methodology. And the methodology is probably one of the most important, if not the most important chapters that are in our manuscripts, right? Because it decides, right? That's where the variables that you mentioned earlier, the operationalization of those variables, that's where that comes in. And then the scales that you're using, right? There's psychometric properties and everything. It's in the methodology too. And then for qualitative research, for example, the instruments that you're taking, the type of analysis that you're doing based on the content, based on the data, that's where you put everything too. And then that's sort of how I do it. I'd love to say, like, it would be very easy for me to mention, oh, the process is very linear. But as you do it more often, it becomes less linear because it's very dynamic. It's very jumps to the end and then jumps to the beginning and jumps to the middle based on what you know, because you cannot be very rigid in your idea of the research process. You have to learn how to adjust and be flexible about it based on new information that you have, right? So if you come up, you suddenly, for example, what if you're very interested in this type of variable, and then turns out, oh, there's no scale for that. What are you gonna do? I think you have to validate.
That's what I do.
Exactly. You have to validate a scale then. And then from that, who are you gonna validate it on? The population. The population is also like something I think it's something we have to talk about later on as well, because that's a very important aspect of the methodology. But exactly, right? So the reason why I want to mention that the research process isn't linear, because the idea that you have in the beginning will not necessarily be the same thing that you're going to have by the end of it. It will most probably change based on all of the circumstances that actually happen throughout the research process. And I am like, personally, this has happened like so many times, like with the manuscript that I have for my current thesis, right? I have this, I wanted to do something else entirely. And then based off of the comments from your supervisors, based on the comments from your lab mates, based off of what is available to you in terms of resources and in terms of ethics, and then you change it. And then you come up with the end of it. And then you just want to make sure, that's why I wanted to start with the end, or to sort of have an idea of where you're going to submit it. For example, if you do want to submit it at a journal, which journal do you want to submit it to? You know, like, because the language is there as well. Like, are you going to submit to like the one in like an American one, or are you going to submit it to like a local one? Which language are they talking about? Which content do they have? Do they accept or not accept certain scopes and limitations? And then that way you have an idea in your head with all the changes and all the new information that you have. Do you bring it in, make it a part of your study, or do you take it out? And because it's not a part of the study. So it's just, that's how I see it. Not very linear, sort of jumping around and making sure that you're flexible as a researcher. And that's another thing. When you think like a researcher, you got to be flexible, right? You can't just accept anything as true. You got to make sure you adjust based on information.
Right? I think you brought up very important idea about to check the methods in the beginning of your research project, because it's especially true in my country, Mongolia, right? Because we don't have any valid, psychometrically sound instruments, questionnaires or tests. Well, we have few, but it's in the deep down of that validation study itself, there's so much debates about how to validate it, right? And in terms of the population size, in terms of the statistical analysis, and in terms of the translation procedure, everything is debatable. And well, when from my experience, the validated questionnaires or the tests in Mongolia is not very good enough, or I can't say that they are psychometrically valid instruments. So that means if someone's interested in doing the research, the very first thing to do they need to do is to check the scale, if they are going to use a scale or in a questionnaire, and if they're going to maybe in qualitative research it could be different. I'm not very sure about that one. Maybe we can hear Lyen's answer next. But yeah, depending on the questionnaire, you are limited in what to do, in what you can study. So for example, my experience that I wanted to study the well-being of people, especially the psychological well-being. And then I looked up the questionnaires and the instruments. There's no valid questionnaire or the scales in Mongolian language or a Mongolian population that I want to study. So depending on that, maybe you could validate the instrument, or maybe you come up with the new instrument, but that takes so much time and effort and resources. So maybe that's impossible for those people like me. So yeah. How about that one? Okay, so you're interested in a topic and a variable, and you want to study it, and you want to approach it qualitatively. So what should you do about it?
So if you're doing a qualitative approach, a lot of it has to deal with what kind of data do you have, first of all. There's a lot to think about. You have to think about what type of data do you have. And then, so for example, do you have archival type of data? So when we're talking about archival types of data, that means just text, sort of literature that's already existing, books, news articles, and so on and so forth. Or are you dealing with interviews, transcripts? Are you taking on, and interviews, there's different kinds, right? There's online interviews, there's just paper interviews, and then there's ones that you do by groups, like focus group discussions. So those are types of interviews as well. And then from there, you can also do archival analysis, sort of data gathering. And then, so you look at what type of data you have. And then the next is what type of analysis can you come up with based off of that data? So there's different types of qualitative analysis. Obviously, I can't go through all of them right now, but I can talk about a few, for example, that I've done. So for example, in my undergraduate thesis, I did a thematic analysis. So that's something coming up with themes based off of interview transcripts. So that's one. A deeper version of that is a phenomenology, sort of phenomenological approach. And it's something that you do, it's very specific, it's very niche. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you do when the experience is very unique to the individual. And then from there, you can also do, I've done an ethnographic study. So an ethnographic study is a lot of based off of the culture. So if you're doing phenomena, that's sort of like one individual or a few individuals' personal experience, but an ethnographic study is sort of an entire culture. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of collective experience, and one makes that collective experience unique. I've done an autoethnographic study. And then and then afterwards, there's a few additional steps, right? Because the thing with quantitative analysis, if I were in the research process, is once you do have your data, the sort of analysis part of it is statistical application, right? And then once you have that, then you essentially have your results. But with qualitative analysis, the huge chunk of the work is at the latter part, because analysis of it requires a lot of experience, requires a lot of introspection, requires a lot of asking for supervisory guidance and stuff like that. And mm-hmm. And there's also triangulation. I think I've mentioned this in methods class before, which is making sure that the information that you have is supported by other sources of information. And then so you triangulate mm-hmm. whether you have this. If it's different from what another source is saying, then there's something you have to change, you have to adapt your methodology and stuff like that. So that's sort of, you get like just a summary of what I've mentioned is you take what type of data you have or what type of data that you're looking for, and then you look for a certain type of analysis that matches that data. And then you got to make sure that your sources are sound. And then, so as you can see, the process is very different from like looking for a specific scale or looking for like the psychometric soundness of specific things. But I think a part of what I like about qualitative research is the type of data that I get to gather is very unique to the participants. And it's something, it feels very humane. That's mm-hmm. why I like doing it, because it tells you a lot about the dynamics of human nature, for example, and it answers a lot of curiosities. And so I'm a huge fan of sort of a qualitative approach. But yeah, it's just a reflection of what you mentioned, but in a qualitative approach, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have another question about it. So let's say that we have one thing has an association with another thing. Let's say that the greed is associated with maybe the hardworking personality. I don't know whether the hardworking personality is a valid thing or not.
Sure, it's fair.
So it's fair. One is a dependent variable and the other one is independent variable. from my approach, right, from the quantitative approach, I'm gonna find a questionnaire or a scale that measures a grade and also the hardworking personality. So that's coming from the perspective that I'm seeing a grade and the hardworking personality as a construct, something that's within everyone. But we can't see it, we can't touch it, but it's in us, like IQ, right? So we can see IQ, but IQ is, there's a theory about IQ. So based off the theory, we can operationalize it, and then we can come up with the aspects or the factors of the IQ, and then we can measure it, right? So how about in qualitative research? You don't have any scale, you don't have any instruments, I think. So you have questions or the interviews. And how are you gonna operationalize what you're trying to study?
Yeah, so I think when you're trying to, the struggle is in the question in itself, because the whole point of qualitative approach isn't really to operationalize constructs. It's a type of sort of being able to eloquently describe or explain or elaborate a specific experience. And then, so like I mentioned, and this is very evident in sort of our different research personalities in itself, that, for example, when you look at research, you're thinking the empirical part of it. When I look at research, I said curiosity, right? So the whole point isn't to sort of put people in blocks or sort of understand them from the perspective of words, but it's sort of looking at through their lived experiences and there was an attempt there to sort of describe it. And then you do have instruments, but it's a different type of instrument than what you're used to, probably, because it's uses a lot of numbers, and in my approach is a lot of words, and it's not just words, because it's not just, how to explain this, it's the questions are just not just questions, right? A part of it is also in the skill of the researcher in order to get the information out of somebody, which is a skill in itself. So for example, you got to build rapport. You can't just go in and expect people to tell you what you want to get from them. You have to make sure that they're comfortable. You have to make sure that you connect to them. You have to make sure that, and this is also cross-cultural. I've done cross-cultural studies, which is basically people who are of completely cultural backgrounds from me, and I had to make sure that they were comfortable enough to tell me their experiences, right? And that's a skill in itself. And not just that, you have to make sure, when do you you probe further towards an answer, and when do you hold back? Because sometimes, you're dealing with very sensitive information. Sometimes you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with difficult experiences for people, and there's like a fine line that you have to thread, whether or not you ask for it further or whether or not you hold back, just to maintain that sort of they're comfortable with it. It's a very sensitive sort of issues. I've talked with transgender individuals based off of their experiences of just living their lives. And I've talked with people who were in isolation during the mandatory quarantine. I've mentioned that. I've talked with people who work with individuals with Down syndrome. And then it's skill related, it's skill based, because you deal with a lot of different people, and then you have to make sure that you're understanding them at a point that's congruent with your study. And that's what makes it even more complex, because while you're, for example, it's skill related, right? So it's not just enough you have the questions. You got the questions you get from existing literature, just the same as quantitative research. You get it from existing literature, you get it from supervisory guidance. So you ask people's opinion, like experts, not just anybody, but like experts. They look at the questions. Oh yeah, I think these questions are good. And then you go out to the field, you gather the data. And it's not just, here's another thing, it's not just enough to sort of make them comfortable, and it's just you're doing so many things at once. It's probably why I like it, because my brain likes being very, very busy, because when you're talking to them, right, and you're making eye contact, you're also observing them as a whole. What are their mannerisms like? Are they uncomfortable? When you bring up a specific topic, does something change in their demeanor? Does something change in their tone? Do they keep looking at a specific area in the room? Do they maintain eye contact with you? Stuff like that. If you bring up specific topics, do they sort of, stay inwards, or are they outwards? Are they more talkative about it? Why are they more talkative about a specific topic and not more talkative about a specific topic? And then so all of those things, right? You note them while you're listening. So you're listening, you're typing that, and then you're noting another thing over here. And then while that's happening, where you're taking in their information and then you're taking in their nonverbal information, you're also doing the analysis right there. Based off of what you know. So it's like a third sort of mechanism in your head. This is what I know based off of the information. Is it matching what I'm hearing so far? And then you adjust it. It's like a third one here where you're just like, you're analyzing the data as it comes to you. And that's something that happened, for example, while I was doing the content analysis for the research protocol that I'm making for my manuscript. I'm looking, they send me their feedback on the user feedback questionnaire. I'm looking at everything that they're saying. And then I'm already sort of gathering the information saying, oh, this is related to this article that I read about something, or this is related to a certain issue that was raised by this specific researcher. This is an issue that was raised, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the process is very happening all at once at the same time. So usually it's funny because usually my notes when I do interviews or when I do like focus group discussions, they're like all over the place because I'm just like taking notes over here and I'm taking notes over there and I'm taking notes over here. And then I somehow have to make sure that at the end of it, it all sort of makes sense. And then to organize that very everywhere type of data into something that's understandable and something that answers the research questions. And honestly, it is in that experience that I have a lot of fun with it. It is in that analysis, it's like very nerd to talk about, but it's in that analysis where you're figuring out, oh, this is a theme because this is unique to that person. Oh, this is not a theme because this is something that everybody mentioned, but is not quite as different or is not quite as unique, etc. And you know what I mean? And it's just it's a very dynamic process that when I did it in the first time during undergrad, I sort of fell in love with it. And that's probably why I work in the academia right now, because it's a very good experience to sort of watch the data form in front of you and take it and then communicate it in a way that helps other people. I think, yeah.
Okay. That's
a
very, for me, it was a very encouraging answer. And I hope everyone listening to what you're saying is having an idea that, okay, this qualitative research is interesting, I hope. But for someone, maybe thinking, someone is thinking like, that's too much, I can't do that. Or they're getting discouraged, right? Or being 100%. Unmotivated about what you're saying. So how do you get your motivations? So for me, I don't think it's depending on our research approaches, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. I think it's pretty same, I guess. Maybe it's more depending. Maybe it's more of a what person we are.
Personal, background.
Personality. For me, it comes from problems. The problems I have with the psychology in Mongolia, for example. The very, very first thing I wanted to do was to validate enough scales and instruments or the questionnaires in Mongolia so that we can understand Mongolian people especially. So that after we understood how Mongolian people think, how Mongolian people act, I got the motivation from that. Okay, there's something I can do or I should do because I saw that problem. So maybe because I saw the problem, I'm the one who feels or thinks about it thoroughly or deeply and I'm the one who's caring about it. So maybe if I just talk about the problem to other people, they don't understand it fully, they don't feel it as I feel it. So for me, it's like this. How about you?
That's a great answer, right? Which is, it's very reflective of your background, which is, you know, you look at the struggles that you have with your country and you're just somebody that wants to do something about it, which tells you that, you know, it's a very problem-solving type of orientation. And I'm sure a lot of the other people in Mongolia appreciate your pursuit of empiricism in your country. So mine's probably a little different. Mine is very intrinsically motivated, I suppose. And honestly, the fact that it's intrinsically motivated, it's probably how I've gotten very, very far, or it's probably how I've gotten very productive with my use of time in terms of research. I would say that, so I'd like to answer it in a personal sense, and then I'd like to answer it in sort of like for those listening type of sense. So personally, I'm just a big nerd. I just really like the experience. It's looking at something and then trying to make sense of the world, you know, and then if you're generally curious about how things go, and research is an avenue for you to generate knowledge, which allows you to help other people and allows you to understand the world better. And then so that's just a part of it. For me, I love what I do because it's something that I get to do and answers all of these things. I would say that in terms of other people, a huge chunk of it, and probably a huge chunk of it for me and for you and for anyone starting out, is probably interest. Right? Are you interested in what you're doing? And that is a very big question, because it's something that's going to take you through the rest of it. Because believe it or not, the research process is very long and exhausting, and it's just like there's ups and downs. I'm not even gonna lie, you know, we gotta, in this podcast, we gotta be honest. We can't just say, oh yeah, it's all really fun, yeah, I love interviewing, coming up with analysis. No, it's not. There's so much stuff you gotta do. There's so much you gotta create on yourself. There's so much you sometimes get to question yourself on whether what you're actually doing is right. And it's like, apart from that, there's like getting all the resources, and you got to get ethics approvals, you gotta propose your etc. It's a lot of work. So you got to make sure that what you're studying is something that's worth all that work, because we all gotta suffer for something. Anyway, and you just want to make sure that what you're suffering for and what you're going for is something that you find personally worth it. Right? Exactly. Are you motivated? Because it is in that interest. It's gonna take you through. It's like sort of like your sort of purpose. What am I doing this for? And is it enough to take me throughout the rest of it? And then I would say interest, right? But another part, and it's a very important part as well, is discipline. So you got to look at your work ethic and then see if it's something that matches the academe. Because if you're somebody that's I hope I'm not discouraging anybody here, but it's a part of it to make sure that you have the executive functioning skills to get you through it as well. Are you organizing data in such a way that it makes sense to you? Are you fully taking in all the resources of your university? Are you fully taking in all the feedback that comes from your supervisor and from your lab mates and everything? Are you making sure that you have enough time in your schedule to do the research, not just to do the research, but just to, you know, get enough rest, get enough time for leisure, working, eating, etc. And all of that requires a certain type of work ethic. It requires a certain type of discipline. So it's a combination of sort of that interest and sort of that discipline. You combine that, and you hope that it's something that gets you through the entire research process. I wanted to combine that because it's not I wanted to be realistic about it. It's, it's not just something that you can think about and it's hopefully it might work. You do need to have and to gain practical skills in order for it to 100% work. But what's important is that because they're skills, you can learn them. Right. And if you're very interested in learning, then you proceed with it because it's your love of curiosity and it's your love of knowledge generation that's going to push you through. Personally speaking. So my personal answer is that I just love doing it, but that's for the other people out there. But yeah, that's a good question.
Well, after hearing that, I remember the last April, I think.
Last April?
I was last April. I was staying in my room
Mm-hmm.
for a month without even going out. I think maybe I needed to go out to buy a food or something. But I was in my room reading about well-being, reading about happiness. So
remember
the very first thought I had about the happiness studies or the happiness research was that they know what they're studying, or they have something something that's similar to maybe IQ. That's what the maybe cognitive researchers are studying, or something like a personality. Well, personality is a complex, but I thought we have something like that. But as a result of my reading, I couldn't find anything. Everything was too complex. Everything was debatable. Everything was construct. I didn't find. Well, there at the time I didn't know about that. As psychology is a very, very sophisticated science. For example, right? We can't see, we can't touch. We can smell, hear, so we are studying something almost invisible. So
construct.
Yeah, and then after I realized that, wow, the science of psychology is very, very hard. And then I was getting discouraged. What am I even doing? Is it gonna worth studying this kind of things when I go back to Mongolia? Can I find any job? What should I do with it? Mm-hmm. So besides those kind of thoughts, I was thinking maybe I'm not good enough to understand this. So maybe the reason why I'm not getting is me. Maybe I'm smart. I'm not smart enough. I'm not intelligent enough, or I don't have virtues of learning, or maybe the benefit, the feeling that I get from the learning, right? Maybe someone who likes to learning gets something else. So maybe I don't have that kind of abilities. Then after a month or 2 months, after I read more and more, I kind of grounded on this on the surface, and then I grasped the ideas about the happiness, and okay, so now everything is coming into the places, and I'm making the connections between them, and now I'm seeing what is really happening in the science of psychology, and also especially in the positive psychology. What the researchers are trying to do and what they're trying to answer, the whole point of thing. So that took me 2 or 3 months of staying in a dark room with the air conditioner. Yeah, only noise is air conditioner.
I remember.
So I think, in other words, the term for that confusion that I don't have the ability or I'm not good enough is the I forgot that one. Is the
imposter
syndrome. The imposter syndrome. So how about you? Did you have anything like that? Did you have any hesitations about yourself? And if so, how did you overcome it? And also, how do you deal with it?
What are you talking about? I'm always confident. No, absolutely not. Oh, that is an excellent question. And that is something that a lot of other researchers have asked me over and over again, which is like, it's interesting that it's a part of human nature that it's inevitable to occasionally at some point in your career question whether you're at the right trajectory. You know what I mean? It's just it happens to everybody, and I think it's very interesting. And I might write a paper about that. But actually, that's something that I'm going through right now with regards to, as you know, I'm working under a new lab, which is the neuropsychology, the behavioral neuroscience and neuropharmacology lab under Dr. Liao. And it's been a bit of a struggle, I'm not gonna lie. And it's a new experience for me entirely, not just because I don't necessarily have a huge background in behavioral neuroscience, but also because of the language barrier. And then so there's I attend and I try to learn, and then I have no idea what they're saying because it's all in Chinese. And then you feel sort of disheartened, right? You feel sort of what do you call this? Discouraged, like what you mentioned earlier. Is this the right path for me, considering that I'm not understanding anything and it's a struggle to learn? I think I probably, but I'm still there and I'm still learning and I'm still trying, right? One thing that's probably very important is to understand that there is a learning curve to literally everything. Right? So you cannot, unless you're some kind of, I don't know, there are some geniuses that exist in the world, but most of us mere mortals, right? There's a learning curve to that. You cannot just start at the beginning, right? You gotta learn the fundamentals. And it's the same with research. You gotta learn the fundamentals, and then you try to inch yourself slightly closer and closer and closer to eventually trying to come up with even more complex research topics and eventually even more complex sort of interests and subjects and so on and so forth. And it's the same thing. That's sort of what I've been telling myself as of the moment, which is the fact that I'm new here. What do I expect? I'm not gonna come up with the same. Also, like, these people that I'm in the lab with, these people have been working at it far longer than I have. I've only been there for like a month or two. It wouldn't be fair for me to try to compare their experiences and their knowledge with mine, because we do not come from the same background. And at the same time, if they were in our lab in applied psychology, they would probably feel what I'm feeling, which is sort of fish out of water. Right? Because that's something that they're not 100% sure about. And then they would start questioning themselves and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of it is really, so first of all, you got to be kinder to yourself. In research, you have to practice self-compassion. It's very important. You cannot proceed and just be angry at yourself if you do not come up with something that's life-changing, because honestly, every work that you do as a researcher is life-changing. You have to be kind to yourself throughout the process. And that includes, when I say self-compassion, that includes not comparing your progress with other people. Because you both come from completely different backgrounds. You both come from, language-wise, you already come from different backgrounds, right? Not just culture-wise. Right? And your upbringing and your interests and all of these things, it literally does not make sense for you to compare yourself with any other researcher out there. And and precisely because you have this unique sort of background, that you have a role in your community that no one else can fill but you. Precisely because of your unique background. You know what I mean? Because of all of your experiences that have led you to this moment has given you a very precise way of looking at the world that literally no one else has, unless they somehow come up with somebody who has the exact same experience as you, which no one else has. And then that's what you can contribute. And that's something that nobody else can take away, you know? And as long as you hold on to that, and as long as you hold on to the idea that there is a role that you get to fill that no one else can fill, and then you combine that with the practice of self-compassion throughout the entire process, and then you hopefully you keep the imposter syndrome at bay. It's gonna come back, right? It's gonna be like, yeah, I'm back again, especially when you're doing all things, new things, right? And then you gotta make sure that you have these things, these safeguards that allow yourself to continue despite all the sort of weird voices in your head telling you that you're not good enough. And another part that I just want to quickly jump in is also, you're gonna have the imposter syndrome when you do things that are outside of your comfort zone. So when you do things that are new, when you learn new things, for example, like when you were learning new stuff about the positive psychology and stuff like that, you're gonna feel that feeling like, hey, oh my goodness, I have no idea. I'm a little distraught at this idea, but it's a part of it. And I just want the new and old researchers who are probably watching this video or listening to it, that you gotta push forward with it, because that's how you grow as a researcher. You cannot grow as a researcher if you just sort of wallow in this sort of, I'm very comfortable here, you cannot ask me to go out. I mean, it's okay. Of course, it's fine if you want to stay there. But also, if you want to grow as a researcher and you want to fill that role that I mentioned, you have to slowly inch yourself and see what's out there. And then it's all just going to come back to, who you are and what you can contribute. And hopefully that's something that's enough to propel you forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You feel good? You feel... Yeah. I'm glad that you're on your research.
Well, we have so much to talk about research, and also about the new researchers who want to stay in their comfort zone and don't want to grow out of their comfort zones. Yeah. Well, the disadvantages of that and maybe the advantages, but I'm not sure, is there any advantages staying in the comfort zones? But maybe we can talk about that later.
Yes,
right?
Of course, yeah.
You will come back, right?
I will. I mean, yeah, definitely. Those are really good. Those are really good ideas in terms of like the purpose of research, and also we could also talk about resources.
Oh yeah, resources.
Yeah. Because I think I wanted to hear what you thought based off of your experience in Mongolia, what resources are available there. And then I wanted to talk about what resources are available in the Philippines as well, and what's available in Taiwan. And then in general, as a researcher, if you do not have the resources, what do you do? Because that kind of feels like you're stuck, right? And that's something I think that some researchers out there are probably experiencing in terms of trying to move forward with their research. Because, for example, if they do have everything that we've discussed, right? They have the interest, they have the discipline, they have the research questions, they have the skills and everything, but then they do not have the resources to pursue their study. How do they handle something that's very in their face as a challenge? And I think it's also a very good topic that we can tackle in the future. I feel like we're going to have a second.
It's going to be soon. And very soon, yeah.
Definitely another episode, yeah. So, no, but like, thank you so much for like inviting me over to talk about this stuff, because this really is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm sure you're very passionate about as well. And we tackled a lot of really great topics, right? From motivation, from dealing with challenges and being in your comfort zone, and most especially what it's like to think like a researcher, and coming from two very different perspectives. I'm very excited for people to hear it and then come up with their own understanding what it's like to think like a researcher. I think this has been a really great experience, and thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. Amazing. Wonderful talk. Thank you. Thank you for accepting.
All right.
Okay.
No.
Bye-bye, Lyen.
Okay.
See you next time, and have a safe trip.
Thank you. Gotta fly. Bye-bye.